The air over the Marshall Islands smells of salt spray and burning gasoline. It is the afternoon of February 1st, 1942, and the flight deck of the USS Enterprise is a landscape of controlled chaos, turning into absolute terror. Black bursts of anti-aircraft fire stitch the sky, but they are not stopping the shadow rapidly growing larger off the starboard bow. A Japanese Mitsubishi G3M Nell bomber, trailing smoke and riddled with bullets, has ceased to be an aircraft. It is now a guided missile. The pilot, likely wounded or dead, has locked his controls for a final suicide run directly at the carrier's wooden deck, which is crowded with fueled aircraft and live ordnance. Sailors and deckhands scramble for the catwalks, diving for steel to escape the inevitable fireball. But amidst the mass of white uniforms blurring toward cover, one figure breaks the pattern. He is not running away. He is sprinting across the exposed timber, heading straight toward a parked, empty SBD Dauntless dive bomber. Aviation Machinist's mate Bruno Gaido is not a pilot, and he has no orders to be there. But in the next 4 seconds, he will make a decision that defies every survival instinct in the human brain. February 1942. The United States Navy is not the titan of industry it will become later in the war. It is a bruised, bleeding animal, backed into a corner. 8 weeks prior, the battleships in Pearl Harbor were turned into twisted metal tombs. The psychological shockwave of December 7th has not dissipated. It has hardened into a cold, terrifying reality. The Imperial Japanese Navy is superior in nearly every metric that matters. Their torpedoes are faster and deadlier. Their Zero fighters can outmaneuver anything with an American star on the wing. And their carrier doctrine is years ahead of Washington's. Across the Pacific, the map is turning red. Hong Kong has fallen. Wake Island has fallen. The Philippines are crumbling under General MacArthur's desperate defense. Singapore, the fortress of the British Empire, is teetering on the edge of surrender. For the sailors aboard the USS Enterprise, this isn't just a deployment. It is a voyage into a void where survival is statistically unlikely. The Enterprise CV-6 is the flagship of Task Force 8. She is a Yorktown-class carrier, a 20,000-ton floating airfield that represents one of the few operational capital ships left to stand between the Japanese Empire and the west coast of the United States. But in early 1942, she is not yet the legendary Grey Ghost. She is vulnerable. The crew knows that if they are found by the Japanese main body, the Kido Butai that devastated Pearl Harbor, they will likely be sunk before they can launch a second wave. The ocean is vast, but it feels claustrophobic. Every cloud formation looks like an enemy squadron. Every glint on the horizon looks like a submarine periscope. Commanding this desperate venture is Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey. He is a man who understands that morale is a strategic resource, and right now, American morale is bankrupt. The United States needs a win, not a defensive hold, not a fighting retreat, but a strike. An offensive punch that says, "We are still here." This desire for action birthed the Marshal Gilbert's raids. It is the first offensive American carrier operation of the war. The plan is audacious in its risk and modest in its strategic goals. Task Force 8 is to penetrate the Japanese defensive perimeter in the Marshall Islands, strike the airfields and anchorages at Kwajalein and Votje, and then vanish before the Japanese land-based bombers can organize a lethal counterstrike. It is a hit-and-run mission, a guerrilla tactic utilized by a navy that knows it cannot yet win a stand-up fight. The Enterprise is sailing into the heart of the enemy's strength, relying on speed, surprise, and the cover of darkness to get into launch position. The tension below decks is palpable. mechanics, ordnance men, and cooks, many of whom have never seen combat, move with a jagged, nervous energy. They are writing letters home that they fear will never be delivered. They are sharpening knives and checking life preservers. The operational environment adds to the dread. The Marshall Islands are terra incognita for the Americans. The charts are old, dating back to 19th century surveys or captured German maps from before the First World War. The intelligence is thin. They do not know exactly how many bombers are waiting at Tarawa airfield. They do not know if Japanese carriers are nearby. They are sailing blind into a spider web, hoping to tear it down before the spider wakes up. As January bleeds into February, the task force maintains radio silence. The ocean swells are heavy, grey, and indifferent. The Enterprise cuts through the waves, her escorts, the heavy cruisers Northampton and Salt Lake City, flanking her like bodyguards. But everyone knows that if the Japanese bombers find them, the cruiser's anti-aircraft guns will be little more than a nuisance. The defense of the ship rests entirely on her own air group, and the luck of the draw. By the night of January 31st, the moon is full, illuminating the wake of the ships like a highway for enemy submarines. Halsey pushes them onward, deep into waters that haven't seen an American warship in decades. The orders are circulated. Launch at dawn. The targets are verified. The pilots in the ready room smoke endless cigarettes, staring at chalkboards that outline flight paths over hostile atolls. But this mission is not just about the pilots. It is about the ship as a living organism. Down on the hangar deck and up on the flight deck, the Airedales, the plane captains, handlers, and machinists are prepping the machines of war. Among them is a young man named Bruno Peter Gaido. He is not an officer. He is not a strategist. He is a mechanic who understands pistons and hydraulic fluid. He, like thousands of others, is just trying to do his job in the shadow of a giant that seems destined to crush them. The Enterprise is about to kick a hornet's nest, and when the hornets come out, they will not care about rank or specialty. They will only care about sinking the flat top. Wulomen bija to 43 hours. The loudspeakers crackle with the order the crew has been dreading and desiring in equal measure. Flight quarters. In the pre-dawn darkness, the flight deck of the Enterprise becomes a theater of blue flame and deafening noise. The radial engines of the SBD Dauntless dive bombers and F-4F Wildcat fighters cough into life, spitting exhaust that glows against the black Pacific sky. The ship turns into the wind, picking up speed until the gale across the deck is strong enough to lift the heavy warbirds. One by one, they roar down the wooden planks and drop off the bow, clawing for altitude before banking toward the Japanese-held atolls of Kwajalein and Watcha. The strike is launched. Now the waiting begins. For the thousands of men left behind on the ship, this is the most agonizing phase of naval warfare. The fog of war is not a metaphor here. It is a literal silence. They can do nothing but watch the horizon and listen to the static-filled reports from the air groups. The news that trickles back is mixed. The American pilots are brave, but they are inexperienced. They are fighting bad weather, jamming guns and faulty bomb releases. And crucially, the element of surprise is not total. The Japanese defenders at Tarawa Airfield are awake. They are scrambling their own aircraft. By mid-morning, the Enterprise is no longer the hunter. She is the hunted. The sleeping giant of the Japanese perimeter has been roused. Radar is still a primitive technology in 1942. The Enterprise is equipped with the early CXAM-1 system, but the blips on the screen are unmistakable. A counterstrike is inbound. From the Japanese base at Taroa, a flight of Mitsubishi G-3M Nell bombers has lifted off. These are not small carrier-based dive bombers. They are massive land-based twin-engine heavy bombers with a wingspan of 82 feet. They are designed for long-range maritime strikes, carrying heavy torpedoes or sticks of armor-piercing bombs. At 13:30 hours, the first raid arrives. The horizon is punctuated by the dark shapes of the Nells coming in low and fast. The Enterprise shudders as she heels over, her rudder hard over to dodge the falling bombs. Giant geysers of white water erupt alongside the hull, spraying the flight deck with shrapnel and foam. The anti-aircraft gunners, many firing in anger for the first time, fill the sky with black puffs of flak, but the Japanese pilots are disciplined. They press their attacks through the wall of fire. The situation on the deck is critical. The Enterprise is in the middle of recovery operations. This is the carrier's moment of maximum vulnerability. Aircraft returning from the morning strike are circling low on fuel. Some damaged, waiting to land. Others are already on deck, being frantically refueled and rearmed for a second wave. The wooden flight deck is essentially a parking lot full of high-octane aviation gasoline and high explosives. A single well-placed bomb or a crashing aircraft could turn the ship into inferno that would rival the fires of Pearl Harbor. It is a logistical nightmare. Plane captains are pushing aircraft around, trying to clear the landing area, while simultaneously dodging, strafing runs. The air boss in the tower is shouting orders over the bullhorn, trying to coordinate the landing pattern, while the ship violently zigzags beneath them. The margin for error has vanished. In this environment, the distinction between combatant and support staff dissolves. The cooks, the yeomen, and the mechanics are all on the front line. There are no foxholes on a flat top. If the ship goes down, they all go down. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and the metallic taste of fear. The combat air patrol, the Wildcats supposed to protect the ship, are swamped, chasing the Japanese bombers in a desperate game of tag, but they cannot catch them all. One flight of 5 Nells manages to penetrate the screen. They glide in like sharks, ignoring the tracers arcing toward them. The Enterprise's 5-inch guns boom rhythmically, shaking the rivets of the ship, but the bombers keep coming. They drop their ordnance. The ocean boils around the carrier. One bomb fragments near the ship, cutting down a sailor on the catwalk. The first combat casualty of the war for the Enterprise crew. The reality of death has arrived on board. The raid seems to taper off as the surviving Japanese bombers turn back toward the marshals. The crew begins to exhale. They think the worst is over, but one bomber is not turning back. It is damaged, trailing smoke, and its pilot has made a calculation that will terrifyingly foreshadow the tactics of 1945. He is banking around, aligning his nose with the long axis of the Enterprise's flight deck. He is not dropping a bomb. He is becoming one. The stage is set. The massive ship is turning. The air is filled with smoke. And on the exposed deck, the machinery of war sits idle and vulnerable. It is in this precise second of paralyzing realization that the lens of history narrows down to a single aircraft parked near the stern and the one man running toward it. To understand the insanity of what is about to happen, one must understand the man running into the fire. Aviation Machinist's mate, 3rd class. Bruno Peter Gaido is not the polished image of a naval aviator found in recruitment posters. He is not an officer with a gold flight surgeon's pin. He is a Knuckle-Buster, a mechanic. He hails from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he carries himself with the rough, unvarnished confidence of a man who solves problems with a wrench and a hammer. He is short, stocky, and tough as old leather. In the stratified society of a warship, he is a blue-collar worker in a floating industrial city. His job is to keep the radial engines humming and the hydraulic lines sealed. He is not paid to pull triggers. He is paid to ensure the pilots can get into the air to do it. But Gaido is also a man of the machine. He knows the Douglas SBD Dauntless better than the pilots who fly it. He knows the rhythm of its Wright R1820 Cyclone engine. He knows the tension of its control cables. And he knows the rear gunner's position. The rear seat of an SBD is a claustrophobic open-air office. It faces backward toward the tail, exposed to the slipstream and the freezing altitude. The armament consists of twin 30 caliber AN-M2 Browning machine guns mounted on a flexible scarf ring. These are not the heavy 50 caliber cannons found in the wings of a Wildcat fighter, which can punch through engine blocks. The 30 cals are defensive weapons designed to spray a high volume of lead, 1,200 rounds per minute combined, to deter enemy fighters from sitting on the bomber's tail. They are light, fast-firing, and rely entirely on the physical strength and aim of the gunner. There is no radar guidance, no computing gun sight. It is just iron sights, muscle, and tracer rounds. Usually this position is occupied by a radioman gunner trained in aerial deflection shooting. But the plane Gaido is sprinting toward, SBD number 6 S5 or perhaps S11, is empty. Its pilot and gunner are not in the cockpit. The plane is parked, chocked, and lashed down. It is effectively a stationary turret. This changes the tactical geometry completely. In the air, a rear gunner is fighting a moving target while moving himself. On the deck, Gaido will be a fixed point. He cannot bank to avoid fire. He cannot dive to gain speed. He is anchoring himself to a piece of aluminum that is sitting on top of thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. If the incoming bomber fires its nose cannons, Gaido has nowhere to hide. If the bomber crashes, he is sitting at ground zero. There is a specific kind of courage required to fly into combat, but there is a different, darker kind of courage required to climb into a parked airplane while a massive bomber tries to crash into it. It is not the calculated bravery of a soldier following orders. It is the raw, reactive instinct of a man who refuses to be a spectator in his own destruction. Gaido sees the threat, he sees the tool to stop it, and he removes the gap between the two. Opposing the lone mechanic is a machine built for destruction on a massive scale. The Mitsubishi G3M, codenamed Nell by Allied intelligence, is the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy's land-based air arm. It is a twin-engine heavy bomber with a wingspan of 82 feet, twice the width of the fighter planes parked on the deck. It is designed to carry a crew of 7 and fly thousands of miles across the Pacific to deliver a payload of heavy ordnance. Even damaged, it is a flying projectile weighing over 8 tons. The pilot at the controls of this specific bomber is operating beyond the bounds of standard military doctrine. In early 1942, the Kamikaze Corps does not yet exist. There are no official orders to crash aircraft into enemy ships. This pilot is acting on a darker, more primal, cultural imperative. His aircraft is smoking. He knows he will not make the return flight to Taroa. In the cockpit of that burning bomber, a decision is made that chills the blood of every sailor watching from the Enterprise. If he cannot live to fight another day, he will ensure the American carrier dies with him. It is a glimpse into the fanaticism that will define the Pacific War, the weaponization of suicide. The stage for this confrontation is not a stable battlefield. It is a shifting, heaving platform. The Enterprise is currently executing a violent evasive maneuver. The helmsman has thrown the rudder hard over to avoid the bomber, causing the massive carrier to list sharply to starboard. The flight deck is tilted at a precarious angle. Standing upright is difficult. Running is nearly impossible. Gravity is fighting against every movement. Worse, the deck is a minefield of potential energy. The pack of parked aircraft near the island superstructure is fully fueled. The fuel lines are full of high-octane gasoline vapor. If the Nell impacts this cluster, the resulting explosion will not just kill the men on deck, it will breach the flight deck armor, pour burning fuel into the hangar deck below, and likely detonate the ship's magazines. The survival of the entire task force hangs on the physics of the next few seconds. The bomber is now so close that the men on the bridge can see the rivets on its fuselage. It is coming in low, skimming the wave tops, aiming to hook its wing into the parked planes. The ship's anti-aircraft fire has slackened. The 5-inch guns can no longer depress low enough to hit it, and the smaller 20mm Oerlikon cannons are jamming or losing the tracking angle. The defense of the USS Enterprise has collapsed down to a single point of resistance. There are no interceptors left in the sky to stop it. There are no missile systems. There is only the roar of the incoming engines, the tilting deck, and the silhouette of Bruno Gaido climbing into the rear seat of a parked dive bomber. The final seconds tick down, not in minutes, but in heartbeats. The Enterprise is groaning under the strain of the turn, heeling so far to starboard that the horizon seems to tilt vertically. On the bridge, Admiral Halsey and Captain George Murray grip the railings, watching the death blow approach. They are powerless. The command hard left rudder has already been given, but a 20,000-ton ship cannot pirouette like a dancer. She drifts, her momentum carrying her side directly into the path of the bomber. The Japanese Nell is a broken, smoking beast, but it still has teeth. Its starboard engine is trailing a thick ribbon of black smoke, and pieces of its fuselage are flaking off, but its wings are level. The pilot has corrected his course. He is not aiming for the water. He is aiming for the island, the command tower where Halsey is standing, and the cluster of fueled SBDs parked right next to it. The noise is physical. The dual Mitsubishi Kinsey engines of the bomber are screaming at redline RPMs, a mechanical wail that drowns out the shouting on the deck. The ship's 1.1-inch Chicago piano anti-aircraft guns are thumping rhythmically, but the angle is too steep, the range too close. The tracers are passing behind the bomber's tail. The defensive screen has failed. Down on the flight deck, the paralysis of the bystander effect takes hold of dozens of men. They are frozen, staring at the incoming aircraft, their brains unable to process the speed of the approaching disaster. But Bruno Gaido is moving in a blur. He reaches the SBD Dauntless. It is a large aircraft, the wing root sitting chest high. There is no ladder. In one fluid motion, Gaido vaults onto the wing, his boots scrambling for purchase on the non-skid walkway. He doesn't look at the bomber. He looks at the cockpit. He jumps into the rear gunner's seat. There is no time for safety protocols. He does not buckle the harness. He does not put on a flight helmet. He is bareheaded, his mechanic's dungarees flapping in the wind. He grabs the spade grips of the twin .30 caliber mount. These guns are cold. If he hasn't prepped them correctly in the morning, they will jam. If the ammunition belt is twisted, they will jam. Gaido racks the charging handles. Clack, clack. He swings the heavy mount around. The scarf ring grates as it rotates. He is now the only active weapon system on the entire starboard quarter of the ship. The bomber is now inside 300 yards. It fills the sky. The nose of the Nels growing larger by the millisecond. A glass-enclosed greenhouse coming to crush him. Gaido plants his feet, leans into the gun cradle, and squeezes the triggers. The twin Brownings chatter violently, spewing brass casings onto the wing of the SBD. Gaido is not firing warning shots. He is pouring a stream of incendiary and armor-piercing bullets directly into the greenhouse nose of the Mitsubishi bomber. At this range, less than 100 yards, he cannot miss. The tracers smash into the enemy cockpit, shattering the plexiglass, shredding the instrument panel, and likely turning the Japanese pilot into a casualty before his plane even hits the deck. But physics has its own momentum. The bomber is already committed to the collision. Even with the pilot dead or incapacitated, the 80-foot wingspan is hurtling forward like a guillotine blade. Gaido does not stop firing. He keeps the triggers depressed until the very last nanosecond, staring straight into the spinning propellers of the enemy. Crash. The sound is not an explosion, but the sickening shriek of tearing aluminum. The Nell's right wing strikes the tail section of Gaido's SBD. The impact is catastrophic. The force shears the entire tail assembly off the American dive bomber as cleanly as a meat cleaver. The Japanese bomber, destabilized by the collision and Gaido's point-blank fire, loses its aerodynamic grip. It violently cartwheels to the right, its momentum carrying it over the parked aircraft rather than through them. The fuselage of the enemy bomber scrapes across the flight deck, sparks showering like fireworks, before tumbling over the starboard side of the ship. It clears the catwalks by inches. As it hits the water alongside the carrier, the fuel tanks rupture, sending a massive fireball rolling up the side of the hull. The heat washes over the flight deck, singeing eyebrows and darkening the paint on the parked planes. Then there is a moment of impossible silence. The smoke clears. The Enterprise is still floating. The flight deck is not a burning inferno. The parked aircraft are intact. And sitting in the rear seat of a mutilated SBD, which is now missing its entire back half, is Bruno Gaido. He is still gripping the handle of his machine guns. He is shaken, deafened by the roar, but miraculously, he is unscratched. He slowly lets go of the triggers, looks down at the severed fuselage just inches behind his seat, and realizes he has just won a game of chicken with an 8-ton bomber. The adrenaline that froze time suddenly releases, and the flight deck erupts into motion. Damage control parties in heavy asbestos suits sprint toward the edge of the deck where the bomber went over, blasting the smoldering debris with foam and seawater. The wreckage of the Japanese bomber sinks rapidly, taking its dead crew to the bottom of the Pacific, leaving only an oil slick and bobbing pieces of aluminum. Bruno Gaido climbs out of his ruined cockpit. His knees are shaking. The delayed physiological reaction to near death. He looks at the SBD. The rear fuselage is gone. The vertical stabilizer, the rudder, the tail wheel, all sheared off. If the Japanese wing had been 3 feet lower, it would have taken Gaido's head off. He is immediately surrounded by his shipmates. They are slapping his back, shouting, grabbing his hand. To them, he is a wizard who just performed a miracle. But Gaido is not celebrating. He is scanning the island. He knows how the Navy works. He left his assigned station, He jumped into an aircraft that wasn't his. He fired weapons without a direct order. In the rigid hierarchy of 1942, this could be construed as a court-martial offense. High above on the flag bridge, Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey has watched the entire sequence. Halsey is not a detached strategist. He is a pugnacious, fiery commander who leads from the front. He turns to his staff. Who was that man? Minutes later, the Admiral descends to the flight deck. The crowd of sailors parts like the Red Sea. Halsey walks straight up to the grimy, sweating machinist. Gaido snaps to attention, expecting a reprimand for endangering ship's property. Halsey stares at him. The Admiral's face is grim, his jaw set. He looks at the sawed-off tail of the SBD, then back at Gaido. "What's your rank, son?" Halsey barks. "Aviation Machinist's mate, 3rd class, sir." Gaido replies, his voice steady despite the nerves. Halsey nods. "Not anymore. You are now Aviation Machinist's mate, 1st class. There is no paperwork, no review board, no waiting period." In a navy strangled by bureaucracy, Halsey cuts the knot with a single sentence. He promotes Gaido 2 full grades on the spot. A rare and massive leap in status and pay. It is a gesture that electrifies the crew. It sends a message faster than any memo. Initiative will be rewarded. Fight for the ship, and the ship will fight for you. The Marshal Gilbert's raids are hailed in the American press as a daring sting against the Japanese Goliath. Strategically, the physical damage to the Japanese bases is moderate. Some hangars destroyed, a fuel dump burned, a few ships sunk. But psychologically, the mission is a triumph. It proves that the US Navy is not paralyzed. It proves that the carriers can strike and vanish. The Enterprise begins to build her reputation as a lucky ship, a ghost that cannot be caught. But for Bruno Gaido, the story does not have a happily ever after ending. His moment on the deck makes him a legend within the fleet, a symbol of the can-do grit that the Navy is desperate to cultivate. Yet, the war is long, and the law of averages is cruel to rear gunners. 4 months later, in June 1942, the Enterprise is thrown into the decisive Battle of Midway. Gaido is flying in the back seat of an SBD piloted by Ensign Frank O'Flaherty. During the chaotic morning strike against the Japanese carrier Kaga, they are separated from their squadron. Low on fuel, unable to locate the task force, O'Flaherty is forced to ditch the plane in the open ocean. For weeks they are listed as missing in action. It is only after the war, when investigators interrogate the crew of the Japanese destroyer Makigumo, that the truth surfaces. Gaido and O'Flaherty were picked up by the enemy ship. They were not treated as prisoners of war. They were interrogated, likely tortured. And then, on June 15, 1942, the Japanese captain ordered them to be bound with weighted ropes. They were thrown over the side, drowned in the dark waters of the Pacific. The hero who single-handedly saved the Enterprise from a suicide bomber was murdered in silence, thousands of miles from home, with no one there to witness his final act of courage. In the grand calculus of the Second World War, the Marshal Gilbert's raids are often reduced to a footnote, a minor skirmish before the titanic clashes of Coral Sea and Midway. But the incident on the flight deck of the Enterprise offers a lesson that transcends the statistics of tonnage sunk or aircraft destroyed. It strips the veneer of industrial warfare away to reveal its core component, the individual human will. War is often discussed in terms of systems, logistics, doctrine, technology. We analyze the range of the Zero versus the Wildcat. We debate the armor thickness of battleships. but systems are fragile. On February 1st, 1942, the systems aboard the Enterprise failed. The radar warning was too late. The combat air patrol was out of position. The anti-aircraft guns could not track the target. The most advanced warship in the American fleet was defenseless against a single broken machine flown by a dying man. What saved the ship was not a protocol or a piece of technology. It was a mechanic who refused to accept the inevitable. Bruno Gaido's jump into that cockpit bridges the gap between the mechanical and the spiritual. It demonstrates that in the chaos of combat, when the chain of command dissolves and the tactical plan disintegrates, survival often comes down to the initiative of a single person who decides to stand their ground. Gaido's tragic end months later serves as a somber reminder of the cost of such courage. He was not a superhero. He was a mortal man who bled and died, like thousands of others in the dark waters of the Pacific. But his spirit imprinted itself onto the hull of the Enterprise. The Big E would go on to become the most decorated ship in naval history, surviving battles that claimed her sisters Hornet, Wasp, and Yorktown. She survived because her crew absorbed the lesson taught by a machinist's mate on a terrifying afternoon in 1942. When the shadow falls, you do not run from it. You run toward it, and you fight